The name comes from the legend of the people whose land was stolen from them. They called this place the Place of the Silent Spirits. By spirits, they meant not only their dead relatives, but also the spirits that they believed inhabited the trees, rocks, and water around them. According to legend, this was where the holiest ceremonies took place. But it was not the ancestors of those who now live in this town that first stole the land from these people. There were others who came before. In those days, the town went by another name, but that name is now hopelessly lost in the veils of time. All we know is that there was another name, and that for some reason, the town was once abandoned by its residents. So we've talked about the game, the story, and the characters, but we haven't talked about what you're going to be interacting with the most in Silent Hill 2, the monsters and the town itself. Let's start with the town, shall we?
You know what I heard? This whole area used to be a sacred place. I think I can see why. It's too bad we have to leave.
I already read a brief description of the town's history from the collectible item, the Book of Lost Memories, found at the Texan gas station in A New Game Plus. What fascinates me about this text is that it gives a lot of detail about Silent Hill's history, but also, well, it leaves a lot to be imagined. Now, for the most part, the town of Silent Hill is generally accepted to be somewhere in Maine. As far as I know, geographically, Toluca Lake, the lake that sits in the middle of the town, isn't actually in Maine, but rather California. If we go from the text that's given to us, the native tribes that are mentioned would have been of the Wabanaki nations that would have encompassed tribes like the Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, and the Passamaquoddy. I mention the native tribes because almost all the tribes of North America had a deep respect for the world they lived in, and to those who walked the continent thousands of years ago, their day-to-day life wasn't just about hunting and gathering, but family, art, music, and the spiritual world. While each tribe was different, yeah, it should be noted that most tribes in North America have creation stories that generally depict humans as coming from nature, not nature coming from humans. And it's very common that most tribes believed in not only a creator entity, but also a malevolent one. Nothing in this world was basic or simple to the First Nations that existed before European colonization, and things like trees, rivers, and animals all meant something to some extent. This, to me, is why the text from the Book of Lost Memories really does lay down a very important ground rule for the mythology and origin of Silent Hill, the town, and the series. In my mind, I feel it's possible that because of European invasion the land became cursed, due to the assimilation and decimation of the Wabanaki nations, or it's likely that the area was always a spiritual hotbed before anyone even claimed the area as a home. Regardless, the town would eventually become plagued with practitioners of the occult, fucking black metal kids, numerous violent crimes, and even seemingly supernatural anomalies like a boat full of tourists on the lake going missing without a trace. The town of Silent Hill just seems ambiguous, and I personally love that because, well, it doesn't need explaining. It's like Zen in Half-Life in that, yeah, you can raise questions about it and how it came into existence, but the fact that it exists is already weird itself, and it probably can't be explained by rational logic or science. Silent Hill to me is neither good or evil. It simply exists as a place that's trapped in a state of mainly evil that can be bargained with or manipulated based on each person. The general consensus is that Silent Hill has different realms to it that all overlap in some way or another. There's the normal world of Silent Hill that has day-to-day life going on at all times. Then there's the fog world, which sort of bends the lines of reality by showing monsters, the famous fog that trademarks Silent Hill games, and some unsettling imagery. Continuing from there, we get the other world, or other side, where it's a distorted and ghastly version of the normal world, with much more monsters, and the rules of reality start to break further. You can make the point that the deeper one goes into the other world, both literally and metaphorically, the more distorted and warped things become. Whether or not these deeper depths are considered their own realms is up to debate, but to me, I feel these depths represent the more darker and repressed portions of individuals, similar to the iceberg metaphor of the mind. I don't think that I can adequately explain how the town functions. I don't think anyone truly can give a 100% definitive answer because it was designed to not have an easy or simple answer. The town is whatever the person in it needs it to be. A tourist attraction, a hiding place, or a place of punishment. It just depends on the individual. Speaking of individuals, let's talk about some monsters. Now, I'm not the first person to throw these theories and interpretations onto the table, mind you, but I think Silent Hill 2 is some of the most downright unsettling monsters in the history of horror. There's something viscerally disgusting and unnerving to the monster design of SH2 that really, I don't know, maybe it's my own personal taste, but there's something dirty and grungy and abstract about these things. Designed by Masahiro Ito, the monsters of SH2 roam the many halls, buildings, and streets of the town and its various planes of reality. While there isn't a huge monster variety, the sheer number of monsters that populates the areas is quite impressive, with the outdoor areas of the game sometimes housing dozens of mobs on screen at once. Every monster clearly has a lot of love and detail put into their putrid appearance, which not only makes them easy to recognize from a distance, but also shows that their design aren't just a mishmash of random horror elements thrown together. It should be no surprise that the town of Silent Hill manifests its environment and inhabitants to suit its, humble guess. These manifestations take on the traits of a person's deepest fears or mistakes, and whether or not these monsters actually have a natural form is a fun thought experiment, really. We see that Eddie does say something about seeing some monsters when he first runs into James, but it's unlikely that Eddie sees the same manifestations as James. In the room prior to meeting Eddie, James can find a dead thing in a fridge, and later on in the prison section there's a corpse near Eddie. I mean, you could honestly argue that these are dead monsters from Eddie's phobias, but it's more than likely they're just remnants of that weird, unnatural energy that floats around the town. After all, as the text implies in the Book of Lost Memories, Silent Hill has had many names and many different inhabitants, long before European colonization. It's entirely possible that maybe, just maybe, there exists magic in the town that's not spelled with just a C, but a CK. So you know some serious shit went down at some point. To me, the monsters in Silent Hill as a whole are exclusive to each person, and their appearance and abilities are generated to affect just the person that conjured them. But there's some sort of implied overlap in terms of physical space. There's a few examples of this in the game that I think show this. One, we see that Laura doesn't grasp why James thinks the town is dangerous in the hospital, when to James, up to this point, he's been Quick Draw McGraw on everything that moves. 2, we see that Eddie doesn't know what James is talking about in regards to Pyramid Head, despite the fact that Pyramid Head isn't exactly subtle or quiet. 3, the boss fight with Abstract Daddy in the maze. These are just a few examples, of course. There's probably others you could infer, but I feel the point I'm trying to get across is that in some way the monsters are both existent and non-existent at the same time, and another parallel to this is in the Doctor's Journal memo. The other side perhaps may not be the best way to phrase it. After all, there is no wall between here and there. It lies on the borders where reality and unreality intersect. It is both a place close and distant. It's just my idea that the monsters are a result of malignant and corrupted spiritual energy, taking shape to suit each person, and when a monster dies, that energy just gets recycled back into the town to eventually take another form. Speaking of forms, I guess we might as well talk about those forms. The first monster James comes across in the town is the Lying Figure. The figure is a feminine humanoid-like creature wrapped in what looks like a straitjacket of its own skin. Starting at the feet, the figures have a pair of black boot-like appendages that seem to be cutting into the legs. The lower body is stained in some sort of blood or tar, and the rear of the figure is pronounced from what looks like underwear. The hands of the figure are bound together, almost like a straitjacket, and the middle of the torso is split open like a vulva or a mouth. The top of the figure's head is shrouded with the skin jacket and has a zipper where the mouth should be, as well as a gaping hole where the eye should be. There also appears to be a slit in the side of the figure's head, which can be seen in the cutscene before the first Pyramid Head battle in the apartments. To me, I view the figure as a representation of James's hatred of seeing his wife bedridden, and the mental anguish it caused him to see her in her sickened state. The straitjacket design always struck me as being derivative of the butterfly motif that appears throughout the game, that's also mentioned in Mary's letter to James in the end. The figure's attack is simply to walk towards James and vomit some sort of acidic cloud out, which could be a metaphor of Mary's illness and medications causing her digestive system to fail. The sexualized theme, at least to me, has also always been a way of showing how truly difficult it was for James to see his wife as attractive from all her physical and mental degradation, and the twisted and tightened appearance could be symbolic of his guilt for still having sexual urges. The figure is probably the most common enemy in the game, and also possesses a unique ability to crawl and scuttle across the ground when they take near critical damage, making them show some sort of instinct to retreat. I also view this as not only something to unnerve the player from the sudden movement, but also give the idea that the figure is like an insect. weak, pathetic, and vulnerable. I actually spent my first few hours dodging and weaving around these things, treating them like the zombies in the early Resident Evil games, until I realized something. They don't even have hands. They can't grab James, and they barely present a threat at all. The next enemy is the Creeper. The Creepers are large insects, somewhat resembling a mix between a beetle and a cockroach, but, you know, fucking Texas size, baby. It's unlikely that the Creepers are actually part of James's subconscious, and likely are just part of the environment naturally. Creepers don't show up too often, and they tend to just follow preset paths to patrol up and down, and their main really interesting usage is in the Historical Society puzzle where they infect the room after the light dies. It's possible, I guess, they could represent disease and decay, as cockroaches thrive on waste of all forms in nature, but I still think the Creepers are the most natural of the enemy roster in the game, and are likely just there for shock value. Next is the Mannequin. As the name implies, the Mannequin is, well, a mannequin-like creature consisting of two lower halves of an everyday clothing mannequin. At first glance, you might also think that the Mannequin is a perfectly mirrored design, but there are some differences. From the bottom, you can see that the Mannequin has what looks like two shoes attached to the legs that show off the rear of the creature. The torso is dressed in a leotard, which also has a pipe coming out of the side, which is somewhat hard to see in-game due to the lighting. The top of the Mannequin consists of two other legs that seem to resemble leg braces, but with no feet attached. The Mannequin is likely a representation of James witnessing his wife lose mobility due to her illness, and the pale appearance of the Mannequin's body could also be a metaphor for the cold and sterile environment of the hospital that Mary stayed in. The fact the creature is also just legs could be a result of James's warped sexual feelings, and maybe I'm extrapolating too much here, but I've always felt the Mannequin could be interpreted as James wanting to dress Mary as something else or replace her, as the first appearance of a mannequin is when James takes the flashlight from the display containing Mary's outfit. Mannequins aren't a very high threat, as they can only swing their, arm legs in a gangly fashion, but their main advantage is that they can actually cloak themselves from the radio static that gives away other monsters, if they're standing completely still. This is used a few times in the main game, but extensively in the side campaign, and is a great mechanic for catching new players off guard. Oh boy, here we go, the Bubblehead Nurse. So cool, it's everyone's favorite trashy cosplay costume. The nurses are enemies that show up in, you guessed it, the bowling alley. No, in the hospital section of the game. The nurses are probably one of the most overused enemies in all of Silent Hill media, but for a good reason. They're iconic, eerie, and dangerous. The nurses wear what look like stylized heels with bare legs. Their main outfit is a smock that exposes their cleavage and thighs, topped off with a traditional nurse's cap. The head of the, Bubblehead Nurse is swollen and almost featureless, save for the faint indication of eyes and a nose with a red square taking place of where the mouth should be. There is some difference between the Otherworld nurses and the Fogworld ones, but it's not really that drastic to be honest, and it's mainly just a cosmetic thing. The nurses likely represent James's dislike towards the hospital staff that took care of Mary, as the term bubblehead is a derogative term to call someone stupid, similar to calling someone an airhead. The swollen nature of their heads could also represent the way that James suffocated Mary, which could also be why the nurses have red squares on their faces to remind James of what he did. The sexualized aspect of the nurses could represent James's sexual tensions, but also the possibility that James could have viewed Mary's female staff members as more attractive. It's hard to tell on the latter, but the former, yeah, check out those pipes, man. Yeah, the nurses are probably the most dangerous enemy in the game, especially in hard mode, because that pipe can knock your fucking teeth out, and the speed of these monsters is actually very deceptive.
snotty little brat! Open up!
On to our first boss monster. Cool, now we can start grinding for pets. The flesh lips are only encountered once in the game before the first Outer World shift. They're a fairly abstract monster at first glance, but I think that's what makes them so memorable. At the bottom we have two dangling legs donning thigh-high boots grafted into a large wad of decaying flesh that looks like a mattress. Between the legs is a hole that has a mouth protruding from it, giving the boss its titular fleshy lips. At the tip of the weeb pillow is actually an arm that holds the monster in place to the ceiling. The flesh lips could represent Mary's entrapment to her bed, as the frame of the edge of the monster could be considered both the edges of a bed frame and a cage. The decaying appearance of the mattress's skin could also be symbolic of a deathbed, as Mary constantly points out she's afraid to die, and James also euthanized her in a bed. The lips could be interpreted as vulva imagery, but I think they could also be viewed as a metaphor for how James suffocated Mary, as the main way the flesh lips attacks is by throttling James and pulling him towards its mouth. For the whole game, you only fight 3 of these things, and as far as threat level goes, the flesh lips only has 3 attacks, all of which are fairly easy to avoid if the player keeps their distance and wrangles properly, like the true rootin' tootin' cowfolk you are.
Yeehaw!
Next is a very obscure enemy, but my favorite of all the standard enemies in the game, the Mandarin. The Mandarin is a pretty cool design, but it's very hard to observe as they move very quickly, only show up in 3 places, and the game doesn't give you a very good way to look at them. These enemies are a mishmash of both the flesh lips and Bubblehead Nurse in terms of appearance. They have dangly legs and wear what looks like a dirty dress. The most noticeable feature is the ridiculously long cylindrical arms that end with lips, which contain black tentacle-like tongues. The Mandarin's head starts out shaped like a normal human head, but then tapers out into just a mouth. It's hard and vague to tell what these monsters mean symbolically, as they're used sparingly, and so everyone's opinion is going to vary greatly on this one, I feel. To me, the Mandarin represents James's inability to forgive himself and let go of his guilt, as they're only seen hanging from fences above nothingness, which could be seen as the unknown consequences for his wife's murder. The lips on their hands could be sexually related, or they could also be similar to the flesh lips' mouths in that they represent suffocation, which is why I think they better represent not letting go of guilt for fear of falling into the unknown of moving forward in life. I, to this day, have never bothered killing these creatures because, well, I feel they're better as a background storytelling device for what's going on inside James's mind. To be fair, they also show up in very inconvenient spots, like the Pyramid Head section of the Labyrinth, the very end of the game, and a transitional space between the hospital section and the park trek. There's just, I don't know, I feel bad if I killed them. Before we go into the last few bosses in the game, there's also one enemy that's worth noting before we move on. The prisoners. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it takes a lot to scare me or get under my skin because I'm a fucking goth and my soul is unspookable. Yet, my first time playing the game, I had no idea of these things, like, at all. The first time I encountered these enemies, I actually had my hair stand up on end because, well, they're creepy, man. In the prison section of the game, you can easily miss the first prisoner as he's in a room that's already full of enemies, and the music is already going to be playing by default. I'm going to go on the assumption that the average player is going to be experiencing the second prisoner first because, well, fuck you, I'm just going to assume everything about you. I'm not going to lie, the reason this scene got to me so hard is because every monster in the game up to this point hasn't made any signs of communication with James other than the sound of their brains being turned into hamburger helper or some agonized scream. To hear a monster that you can't see say something, that's spooky, man. Don't even try to deny it. There's a lot of speculation that the prisoners are saying ritual, which I can get behind. Now, admittedly, I find the next community theory a bit of a stretch. Some people think that the monster's line of ritual is saying "Are you sure?" backwards. Now, why do I say that's a stretch? To be real, I work with ambient audio, and my whole musical roots stem from backmasking songs and sounds. There's an old debunked theory that everything we say has always got some darker meaning behind it, like "I love you" when spoken, and then played in reverse has some cryptic evil message in it, but that's just not true. Firstly, every person says words different. Anyone who knows me in real life can confirm I say weird shit all the time, and it's because I have a slight lisp and a nervous stutter. Let's do a little experiment here with the ritual and "Are you sure?" audio to prove that the theory's wrong. So here's me saying ritual normally. Ritual, 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 reversed. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Now let's add some fun filters to be TikTok famous. Ritual, 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 and reversed. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Now, the other reason I find this theory bunk is because, well, let's not beat around the bush. The game was made in Japan, and not everyone there speaks English as a first language. The likelihood that this whole audio file is also just spooky gibberish, it's entirely possible. Oh yeah, that's right, the prisoners. The prisoners are actually unique in that James doesn't physically see them, but he can tell where they're at in the cells and shoot them. They make pain sounds and they die, but they also pose zero threat to the player. I still think I wanted to include them because, to me, the prisoners are just a part of Silent Hill being, well, Silent Hill. It's not normal, it's beyond reality, and these two guys don't need a reason or backstory. They're like the bathroom thing that sounds like the scientist from Half-Life. Up next is a boss and normal enemy in the hotel portion, the Abstract Daddy. The Abstract Daddy is probably one of the most interesting debates among SH2 fans, and like I stated early on, I'm going to try and keep this in a vacuum and exclude things like translated tweets, developer afterthoughts, and things of that nature. I'm just going to play this like a bricked hand in Yu-Gi-Oh! And throw my cards on the table and leave in peace. So, the Abstract Daddy seems to resemble a mixture of two human forms trapped within a bed frame and wrapped in a blanket of skin. The top form is in a position where it's pushing down on the lower form constantly, with its hands and legs stuck through the bottom layer of the frame. The form on the bottom is less defined than the top, but it does have a slightly phallic shape with a pair of lips at the end. The underside of the creature also has a vulva-like slit in the middle that it can use to latch onto James. Now, what this monster means is going to vary greatly from person to person, but for me, I believe that Angela and James's version of Silent Hill seem to mesh together, probably due to the lower depths of the labyrinth causing some sort of hiccup in the town's energy. I say this because the meat locker scene with Eddie and the staircase scene with Angela towards the end of the game. Also, Angela brutalizes the monster's corpse, which to me signifies that yes, without a shadow of a doubt, she and James both saw the same manifestation and the room looked exactly the same for both of them. To me, the Abstract Daddy is a very overt and obvious metaphor for Angela's sexual and physical abuse at the hands of her father. The top figure represents a dominating male, and the bottom figure is a subdued and helpless female, clearly signifying sexual abuse. I also believe that the two monsters are trapped together, not just for the image of sexual coupling, but also to show that Angela's mind is forever warped and reminded of the abuse she received. I don't think that this monster could be fit for James's manifestations for a few reasons as well. Number 1, all but one of James's manifestations are feminine and represent aspects of his wife's illness. Number 2, the sexualized aspects of James's manifestations are subtle and not nearly as overt and violent as the Abstract Daddy. Number 3, the monsters that James sees contains aspects of guilt rather than flat-out aggression. I also think the reason the Abstract Daddy even tries to fight James in the first place is because he intruded into the room. We see that the monster turns its attention from Angela to James as well. It's hard to tell from the shifting camera angles, but it does. The reason I feel it even picks a fight with James is because, well, it's a monster and driven by its natural aggression and need for dominance. The reason I even go as far as to put so much detail into this enemy is because it seems to cause a lot of debate, mainly due to tweets from Masahiro Ito. In the year 2007 Jesus H. Christ, it's almost a goddamn decade since the game fucking came out. It's about as pointless as when J.K. Rowling made Dumbledore gay. There should be such a thing as fucking finality in fiction in this day and age. Outside sources should not influence a final product, especially decades after the product came out. That's bullshit, and deep down I can tell you're preparing your greasy sausage fingers to write up a vitriolic and neckbeardy response. But am I really wrong? Ask yourself. Honestly, ask yourself, am I wrong here? You know, I can imagine you thinking, "Ugh, Seth, you ugly subhuman, what the fuck do you know about storytelling? I've completed 2 fucking manuscripts, wrote fucking fiction since I was in the 2nd grade and taught creative writing. This fucking script you're hearing is a result of my writing skills and using my drama student skills to present it. Will I make mistakes? Fuck no, I'm perfect. But in reality, once this video is done, my words are done, my opinions are done, and the music I made for it is done. If I want to change my opinions down the line, it's possible, but guess what? This video is what it is. If I want to change something, I'll change it in editing, and not after. It's called integrity, and accepting something is finished. I don't give a good goddamn if Ito made the monster design. He didn't make the whole game. He may be the monster artist, but big whoop. Ito isn't Silent Hill 2, the product, and it bothers me because yeah, art's interpretive, but video games are a collaborative effort, and I'm in no way trying to rip on Ito. Fucking look at him, he's gorgeous. But I mean shit, dude. George Lucas didn't create the art, music, or set design for Star Wars. That fucker can't even settle on the correct pronunciation of a made-up bullshit alien he designed.
They all joined forces and everything, and the Gungas battle the droids in this huge kind of war and peace battle.
Mind you, Masahiro Ito is a fantastic artist, but come on, man, you're really gonna sit there and say you regret making Pyramid Head when you still use it as your Twitter icon? Come on, get real and embrace the work you made, like Mike Matei with his eventual acceptance of Minecraft with Gadget. I think Ito would be a lot happier if he just deflated his ego. Then he could be like me, and just be a self-assured paranoid shut-in that swears at people for liking things he doesn't like. Moving far away from the topic of how much I can't stand Twitter and social media being used to stamp approval on decades-old art, let's talk about the most iconic, important, and analyzed monster that Ito designed, the big man himself, Axl Rose. Nah, just kidding, it's Pyramid Head. I don't think it's even fair to bring up Silent Hill 2, or the franchise for that matter, without mentioning Pyramid Head. I mean, look at him, he's got a pyramid on his head! In all seriousness, what makes Pyramid Head stand out is honestly his design. He's a mixture of the abstract as well as the familiar, and I think that really leaves a mark on his impact. If you look at classic horror film monsters, they stand out because they're a mix of abstract and familiar. Jason is just a dude in a hockey mask and a big knife. Freddy is just a dude in a Mr. Rogers sweater and some gardening tools. Leatherface is a dude with a skin mask and a logging tool. There really is a lasting power of doing something as basic as taking a person shoving something under their face and calling it a day. I mean, Slipknot did it pretty well. Pyramid Head's design consists of a standard physically toned male of a slightly taller height than James. He wears a very basic outfit of a dirty robe garment, some black boots, and what looks like surgical gloves. The most obvious feature is his sharp, pyramidal, metal helmet that adds a pained and awkward look to his posture and gait. Shockingly, Pyramid Head also has a worm-like tentacle that can come out from his helmet, but it's only used for a grab attack. Pyramid Head not only looks visually interesting, but he's also a standout amongst the monsters that James faces, as he appears to be the only male monster in the roster, and the only monster that seems to be actively engaging with James. It's easy to make some inference that the many monsters that roam the town seem to do so out of some aimless and animalistic matter, and only interact with James when he approaches them. Pyramid Head, on the other hand, seems to stalk James, always being one step ahead of him and being exactly at the right place at the worst possible time. James first sees Pyramid Head in the beginning of the apartment section of the game, and at first he's totally non-hostile and simply stares at James from the other side of the bars. I've always loved this scene as he's not holding a weapon, and James at this point doesn't even have a firearm, so this always stuck with me as Pyramid Head's non-verbal way of saying, I know who you are, and I want you to see me, so you know who I am. The next time Pyramid Head shows up in the apartments, James walks in on him assaulting and killing 2 of the mannequin enemies, which leads to him getting shot repeatedly after he senses James in the closet. Notice he also doesn't have a weapon yet, but he could easily overpower James if he wanted to, considering he also proves he can literally just shrug off numerous bullets from a handgun. I feel Pyramid Head didn't actually know James was there at first, but was at least semi-aware of him being in the room, just based on the fact that he starts to slow his movements and trail off as he drags the mannequin, with its twitching being the only thing to distract him at first. The fact he leaves the room always struck me as Pyramid Head saying to James, I know you see me, I know you're scared of me, you don't hurt me, but I can hurt you. Towards the end of the apartments, James also stumbles across Pyramid Head violating a lying figure, but this time Pyramid Head lifts up something dangerous and starts to attack, rather slowly, giving James just barely enough time and room to defend himself, until he eventually just stops and walks down the stairs towards the exit of the complex. I've always viewed this scene as Pyramid Head showing James that if he wants to keep pushing forward through the town, he has to push himself physically and mentally. If he wants any sort of resolution or answers, it's going to be an unpleasant experience. The handgun also is shown to not be able to outright kill or harm Pyramid Head, so I feel he merely was toying with James as if to say, you can't kill me, but I'm gonna give you a reason to know I'm dangerous, and I'll fight back. Oddly enough, Pyramid Head takes a backseat to the game for a long time, until he shows up at the top of the hospital roof where he shoves James into a fence that leads him further into the area he needs to be in. I've always seen this as Pyramid Head's way of keeping James on the right track, and preventing him from screwing around or getting hesitant about his journey deeper into the town, and to show him, hey, I can show up anywhere, don't think I forgot about you. Shortly after James is reunited with Maria in the Otherworld version of the hospital, Pyramid Head shows up to pursue the 2 outside the elevator that will lead back outside. Rather than a knife, Pyramid Head chooses a much lighter but equally dangerous spear that he uses to impale Maria as she tries to get into the elevator. It's pretty obvious at this point, Pyramid Head doesn't actually want to kill or harm James and only keep pushing him further and further ahead, as there's clearly nothing stopping him from just thrusting his spear through Maria and into James. I've always viewed this action as, I can move faster than you think I can, and I can take things away from you if I feel like it. Once again, it's actually a very long time until James sees Pyramid Head again, and the next encounter is actually entirely optional in the labyrinth under the prison. Our geometric friend is seen patrolling around a section of the maze, and he still chooses to wield a spear this time, even allowing James to grab his knife weapon in the center room of the section he's patrolling. As this is optional, it's hard to interpret as maybe Pyramid Head was actually stuck in the maze due to Angela and Eddie causing the energy of the area to shift, and he's essentially just infinitely looping, looking for James until he can find out where he needs to be next. I'm not entirely sure if it's just the town's energy or Pyramid Head that kills Maria in the maze, but I feel like due to the more violent and sexual nature of 46 Tool Fan 2, it's more plausible that Maria's next death was done by the town to further torment and push James. At last, we come to our final encounter with Pyramid Head, this time in the hotel, where he executes Maria in front of James once he walks into the room. It's worth noting that there are 2 Pyramid Heads in this encounter, but I feel it's the same entity, just split into 2 halves to further challenge and break James's spirit. However, as James has finally embraced his guilt, accepted what he's done, and taken a stand to engage the conflict rather than avoid it, Pyramid Head realizes he's no longer needed and commits suicide. There's a lot of interpretation of what Pyramid Head is in regards to the mythology of Silent Hill, and where he fits amongst the pantheon of other named entities like Metatron, God, and the red or yellow gods. To me, and I'm going to break my vacuum rule for a minute, based on the seal of Metatron being used in the hotel arena, and the fact that Valtiel in SH3 has the symbol tattooed on his shoulder, it's likely that Pyramid Head is an underling or member of Valtiel's sect in the Order. Whether or not Valtiel is the Yellow God is up to interpretation, but regardless, I think Pyramid Head does serve Valtiel, and by proxy God. How high of a rank that Pyramid Head holds in terms of power, Who knows? There's no clear-cut way of determining this, but to me, Mathman might lie somewhere in the middle, as he's clearly not just some average thoughtless creature, but he doesn't hold enough influence as a being like Valtiel. What do I personally think Pyramid Head represents in the game? Well, it's gonna sound boring, but it's flat out said by James, the one who manifested him, that he needed someone to punish him for what he's done to Mary. Pyramid Head represents James's hatred for himself, his repressed sexual nature, and almost a mirror of what James thinks he is, a monster, something evil, something that skulks in the shadows, something with no remorse or regard for life or limitations. I find it funny that James constantly reassures himself that he's not crazy or not like Angela or Eddie, despite the fact they're both correct about James in one regard. James is guilty, and he's committed a moral atrocity regardless of whether it was right or wrong. Pyramid Head, to me, doesn't represent some form of power fantasy that James wants to play out, but rather he simply reflects James's own psyche and wants to break him for whatever agenda the town has. Each time he shows up, it's always to push James into a state of acceptance with his actions and emotions by ramping up the stakes each time he shows up. Yeah, he leads him further into a town like a shepherd, but it's never to help James. I feel like, yes, I still stand by my idea that Pyramid Head is truly neutral and only acting on the town's energy and needs, rather than a force of evil or good. He's just a device used to break, torture, and destroy someone. How they react to his actions is up to them. I feel my theory for this stands up pretty well, because if you watch closely, when James stands to confront the two Pyramid Heads in the hotel after they kill Maria, you can see their posture is almost hesitant. And it's the only time in the entire game that Pyramid Head reacts with any visible uncertainty towards James. To me, when he stabs Maria again, the intended goal was to shatter James into a further state of disarray and agony to punish him endlessly and to make him eventually a thrall of the town and help achieve whatever God and the Order had planned. However, because James has accepted his actions and realized he can fight back, this naturally breaks the rules that Pyramid Head operates under, and once James continues to fight back non-stop, it creates a paradox of some sort, which, like I said, causes him to commit suicide out of desperation and realization, maybe to reconstitute as something else later on. I mean, this is all just what I think, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Masahiro Ito will tell me I'm a raging jackass and draws me as a monster for his own personal Silent Hill project. Regardless, I saved Pyramid Head for last because he really is a fascinating thing, not just as a monster, but as a concept for personal growth and acceptance. There's a very sad reality with mentally ill individuals like myself that will eventually show up at some point in time. Do you forgive yourself? Are you truly atoned for your past? Are you doing enough to make yourself a better person? I mean, shit, I face these issues every damn day. It's not a choice. These thoughts just manifest constantly when I'm by myself, when I'm driving, listening to music, not working on some project, and worst of all, when I'm dreaming. I can lie to people in public and say my day is fine and rattle off some boring conversational filler about my job, or I can smile and hold a conversation for hours with someone, but once I'm alone, with my thoughts, it's a different story. I live memories in my sleep of family members I said horrible things to when I was a teenager. I'll sit in my car and think of how friends I knew in high school might hate my guts for turning my back on them for a woman who didn't even ultimately care about me. I think about my time here on YouTube because, well, it's painful to think that I'm both lucky and unfortunate to have been preserved in this kind of in vitro state since coming back after I moved from my last home. I made videos and gained traction when I was 18, but now I'm 29 and I care about things like sub counts, drama, or trends. It's just not there. It doesn't exist. I can't feel it. I don't know how to feel it. Should I be happy? It's hard to convey this, but I do enjoy seeing my sub count go up, mind you. It shows a sign I'm hitting the right notes, but is it a punishment that regardless of how much I achieve or make, I don't feel anything half the time? Or is it a sign that I'm self-aware of the fact, well, none of it matters? It's a moral paradox as a creative person to want to achieve and do better constantly, when you know nothing ultimately matters and nothing I make will ever have the same integrity or drive I had when I was younger. I can't even begin to describe how I know my gift as a writer is a supplement for my destroyed psyche, and no matter how eloquent and rehearsed I sound in this series, I still have a lisp from drastic weight shifts as a teenager and my face being narrow. I still have a nervous and unnatural cadence to my voice because of OCPD and CPTSD forced my mind into a constricted and unnatural pattern. I'm not going to remember 3/4 of this entire project because my memory is so frayed and degraded from years of trauma that I won't be proud of it years from now, and I wish I'll never have made it at all. But is it a punishment? Do I deserve to feel a sense of pride or ego based on my life and my actions to others? Have I suffered enough and became selfless enough to allow myself to feel a sense of ownership to my skills? Well, to me, yes. And that's what makes Pyramid Head such a powerful character. I don't have to hide. I don't have to feel bad for being skilled at my crafts. I know that I make things for the benefit of others first and for seeing self-gratification last. I know that, and I accept it. And it's why I'm even making this series in the first place, to prove to myself that I can and do have the power to improve my love for analysis and writing, and I have everyone here to thank for that. And I really mean it. And thanks for watching.